War of the Worlds, The Resurrection. A novel by J. M. Dillard. Chapter 11. The scars of destruction in the quiet old neighborhood were gone now, buried under tract housing, but Harrison's mind saw them still. The darkness had taken on a nightmarish quality. In every shadow, every unlit doorway, he imagined he saw dark, ominous forms writhing. Harrison pulled the Bronco up onto the concrete driveway in front of the modest one-story house and turned off the headlights. After dropping Suzanne off, he had headed there without even realizing where he was going. In a way, the sight of the old house comforted him, yet at the same time, it added to the illusion that he had moved backward in time some 35 years. Harrison switched off the ignition and rested his head gently against the steering wheel, taking deep, measured breaths in an effort to regain some measure of control. The kitchen lights filtered through faded yellow-checked curtains. As usual, Clayton was still up, even at this late hour. Like his adopted son, Forrester was troubled by insomnia, which, instead of easing as time separated him from tragedy, steadily worsened. After Harrison was old enough to move into his own place, Clayton wandered fully dressed from room to room most nights, with all the lights on, catching an occasional catnap. No matter what time Harrison stopped by, even after a late date with Shar, sometimes 3 in the morning, there was Clayton, fully awake, with the television blaring whether he was watching it or not. There was a time when Harrison visited him every day. Then work and Charlotte kept him busy, so that he stopped by only every few days, then only once a week, then every 2 weeks. Work and Charlotte, and the fact that he could scarcely bear to see his idol sliding deeper into idleness and despair. Harrison got out of the Bronco, went to the side door, and let himself in with a key. The kitchen was filthy, garbage bags piled up by the back door, dishes covered with moldy food stacked up in the sink, crumbs on the counters, the floors, everywhere. Clayton had been a meticulous man, at least until depression had seized him. When Harrison moved out, it got worse. Harrison realized guiltily that now that he no longer needed a father to take care of him, Clayton had lost his purpose and was simply waiting to die. Harrison walked through the kitchen into the hallway. The smell of aging garbage gave way to a familiar, musty, old paper smell that Harrison found nowhere else except this house. One that he associated immediately with Clayton Forrester and his beloved files. In the living room, the old black and white Motorola was tuned to Johnny Carson with the volume at full blast. 6 feet away, Clayton Forrester sat snoring on the sofa, his slippered feet propped on the coffee table, head thrown back, mouth open. His cheeks were covered with a several-day growth of silver beard, which meant he hadn't been out for a while. He wore the beige cardigan Harrison had given him last Christmas, and while it fit him then, now he seemed swallowed up by it. He looked frail, bony, shrunken under his clothes. On the end table next to the sofa were 3 plastic prescription bottles, 2 of Clayton's heart medicine, 1 of Elavil for the depression. Harrison sat down in the sagging green armchair with the broken spring and watched Clayton sleep. Clayton, I need your help. The thought pulsed in his mind so strongly that he almost expected to hear it. He wanted to reach out, shake Forrester awake, force him to listen. Clayton, it's happening again. I need your help. He actually leaned forward and reached a hand out to touch the old man, but something stopped him. Look at him. He's a beaten old man. What more can he do to help? What right do you have to expect anything more from him? Harrison realized that he had come for reassurance, a terrified child running to his father for protection, for comfort. He rubbed his face with his hands. Why did I come here? What am I, crazy? Clayton doesn't deserve this. He's tired, old, not well. He's been through enough already, and this would kill him. What possible good would it do to tell him? Nothing, Harrison knew, except make himself feel better. He was behaving like a selfish child, running to his parent for comfort and reassurance, thinking only of himself. He sat in the armchair and stared at Clayton, unable to move. On the television, the audience roared at some off-color double entendre Carson had made to a comely guest. The sound of raucous laughter struck Harrison as offensive. He rose, leaned over toward the set, and snapped it off, intending to leave. Clayton could sleep. He had already given Harrison all he needed by way of the files. There was nothing more to be gained by terrifying the old man with the news of what had happened at Jericho Valley. The screen went gray, then black. Clayton stirred. "Harrison?" Looking disoriented, he raised his head. There was a frightening vagueness in his dark eyes where there had once been brilliance. Harrison looked away, unable to meet that gaze for long. "Sorry, Clayton." He tried to smile, tried to keep the fear from showing in his eyes. "I didn't mean to wake you." "My God." At the sight of him, Clayton sat forward on the couch and rested a hand on his chest. "What time is it?" "Almost midnight." Harrison walked over to the side of the couch, but didn't sit. "Did I startle you?" Clayton grunted and shook his head. Supposed to take my pill a half hour ago. Damn it, I guess I slept through my watch alarm." He fumbled with one hand for the glass on the end table. His tone was carefully casual, but Harrison detected the shortness of breath. "Let me get you some water." Harrison scooped up the glass and hurried into the kitchen across the creaking wooden floor. As he held the glass under the tap, he saw that his hands were shaking. Jesus, I've damn near startled him into a heart attack just by turning off the TV. I can't tell him what's happened. It'll kill him. What the hell was I thinking of coming here tonight? What did I expect him to do? His own breath was coming in short gasps, but there was no time to calm himself. Clayton needed the medication now. He returned to the living room so fast water sloshed over the side of the glass. Clayton was sitting with his eyes closed. His skin looked gray and waxy. "Clayton? Dad?" Harrison leaned over him. Forrester opened his eyes and tried unsuccessfully to smile. "You haven't called me that in a long time." He took the glass, sipped some water, then tilted his head back and swallowed. One of the medicine bottles was uncapped. Apparently, he'd already put the pill into his mouth. "Thanks," Clayton said. He drank some more water and set the glass down with an unsteady hand. "Are you okay?" Harrison crouched down, holding on to the armrest of the sofa. "Sure," Forrester coughed, then turned his head to stare innocently at him with soft brown eyes. "Just forgot to take my pill, that's all." He paused. "Out with Charlotte again tonight?" "Yeah," Harrison lied. Clayton despised Charlotte, but it was as good as any excuse. "Just wanted to see how you were doing." "Fine," Clayton answered with total sincerity, despite the evidence to the contrary. "So you and she are still planning on getting married?" "Well, yes, actually. We're having a little disagreement right now." Normally, Harrison would never have mentioned it, since it only gave Clayton more ammunition for his anti-Charlotte campaign, but Forrester might accept it as an explanation for Harrison's agitated mood. "It's work-related." Clayton nodded. "Let me guess. She wants you to get a higher-paying job, go where the money is." He lowered his hand from his chest. The color seemed to come back to his face. Harrison relaxed a little. "Speaking of work, Ephraim finally got me that microbiologist. Remember the one we talked about?" Clayton did. "Sylvia's cousin?" "Second cousin," Harrison corrected him. "Does she look anything like her?" Harrison shrugged. If there was any resemblance other than the fact that both were brunettes, he'd missed it. But to please Clayton, he replied, "A little." "Married?" Clayton asked innocently. "Divorced." Harrison's lips thinned. "Not that it's any of your damn business." Clayton smiled faintly. "I'm sure it's not, but I'll bet she has more in common with you than Charlotte Phillipson does. Harrison shook his head. I'm afraid our theory backfired. She's not as interested in working against the aliens as we thought. Instead of wanting to deal with the reality of what happened, she's running away from it. So she's refused the job? Clayton seemed disappointed. Not yet. She's at least willing to listen, to look at some tissue samples, though. Harrison broke off. He had almost said, though after what happened today, I'm not sure she'll stay. Harrison, Clayton said softly. His voice was suddenly stronger, his eyes lit up by a spark of his former brilliance. Something happened today. Something you're not telling me. I may be a forgetful old man, but I'm not that stupid. I can tell when you're upset. You should see your face. Harrison rose and stared down at the worn carpet covering the terrazzo floor. It's nothing, really. Like I said, I had a fight with Char. Clayton shook his head gently. It has nothing to do with Charlotte, I'm afraid. I've seen you after fights with girlfriends, Harrison. No, this is something far worse. Harrison looked back up and cursed himself for being so transparent. He tried to think of a better excuse, something Clayton might believe, but his mind was a blank. When you first came in, Clayton said slowly, your expression. God, I'm not sure I have the words to describe it. He hesitated, thinking. Haunted, maybe. I haven't seen that look on your face in a very long time. Harrison stared at him. My God, the old man knew. Forrester's eyes were still focused on Harrison, but he seemed to see beyond him at something, someone else in the distant past. I think the last time I saw that expression on your face, you were 6 years old. When I woke up and saw you for a minute, I was back in 53. You're right. I think the aliens are back. Harrison nodded, amazed. How did you know? Forrester managed a slight smile. I didn't until just now. He patted his chest. You didn't tell me because you were worried the shock would kill me. But I've already had my scare, son, and I'm all right now. Why don't you tell me about it? Harrison sank down on the couch next to him and leaned forward to cover his eyes with his hands. Norton picked up a transmission. He began warily. It was directed toward a point in the constellation Taurus. It originated from the Jericho Valley disposal site. Jericho Valley, Clayton echoed. I remember. One of the first storage areas. Everyone who worked with the project was furious about it because it was only hours away from the Institute itself, not to mention the most populated areas of the West Coast. 6 barrels are empty, and the rest, hundreds, are missing. He glanced unhappily at Forrester. I saw it with my own eyes. The military already knows about it because all the soldiers on the base were killed. They're trying to blame it on terrorists, of course. He leaned forward again to rest his head in his hands. I don't know what to do, Clayton. I don't know what to do. I'm so scared. I can't think. The news had the completely opposite effect that Harrison expected. Instead of becoming agitated, Forrester seemed to grow stronger, calmer, younger. 6 barrels, he said, his voice soothingly rational. We're very, very lucky. They have no weapons, no shelter, no ships. And without those, the odds are greatly in our favor. This time we can stop them even if for some reason the bacteria doesn't. God, I hope so, Harrison whispered. Because Norton's the only one I can count on. I'm not even sure Suzanne, the microbiologist, will believe me. Clayton's tone was firm as he reached out to rest a hand on the younger man's shoulder. Harrison, sometimes I think I did you a disservice raising you as I did, exposing you to all of this. You feel the fate of the world rests solely on your shoulders, but this isn't something you and Norton can solve by yourselves. You've got to get help. Where? The government. The government? Harrison straightened abruptly. Clayton pulled his hand away. I can't believe you, of all people, are telling me this after what they did to you. You expect me to trust them? There's no reason to make this a personal vendetta, Clayton answered coolly. They didn't single me out, and what they did affected the entire world. We're talking right now about the fate of every man, woman, and child on this planet. You can't afford to let what happened in the past stop you from getting every shred of help you can, because if you don't, you put all our lives in jeopardy. Who knows? Maybe now the government is willing to try to correct what it did. I can't trust them, Harrison said. I didn't say you should, Forrester sighed. You can take advantage of their help without trusting them. There are some names of Pentagon contacts in the files. I can't remember them off the top of my head anymore. You might want to see if any of them are still alive. If not, maybe Jacoby can help you get in touch with the right people. All right, Harrison agreed grudgingly. And do what you can to convince that microbiologist, Clayton added, his face alert, responsive. Getting a thorough analysis on paper is critical if you're going to get the government to believe you. You're going to need all the help you can get. I'll try, Harrison said with a sinking feeling. But I don't think it's going to be easy. Chapter 12. Suzanne leaned over the ancient IBM Selectric in her office, squinting at the line typed on white bond paper. Dr. Blackwood, I am hereby tendering my resignation. There was definitely more she wanted to say, but she was so angry, so exhausted, so confused that she couldn't sort it all out. Certainly she hadn't been able to get to sleep after arriving home at 11:30. She tossed and turned, too furious to relax, and then finally left Debbie and Mrs. Pennyworth to slumber peacefully while she went to the Institute to type up her resignation letter. Now it was 1:30, and Suzanne had it all planned. She'd leave it on his desk tonight and never have to see the man again. She felt sorry for him in a way, sure, but that didn't alter the fact that he was suffering from paranoid delusions and utterly impossible to work for. She'd been filling in Jacoby, too. A prestigious place like the Institute didn't need a nut like Harrison Blackwood giving it a bad name. She reread the sentence for the 1000th time. Oh, the hell with it. She yanked the paper from the carriage, signed and dated it, folded it, and slipped it inside the envelope already addressed Dr. Harrison Blackwood. If he wanted an explanation, he could just ask poor old Jacoby, who would get an earful from her tomorrow. She glanced at her watch and groaned. Today, that is. Maybe she'd be able to talk Dr. Jacoby into a transfer, but if not, she promised herself grimly then, by God, she'd quit, and she and Debbie would be on the next plane back to Canton. The thought caused tears to sting her eyes. She had wanted to come someplace totally new and different, someplace where she could start a new life, where there was nothing to remind her and Debbie of Derek and all the pain he'd caused. So much for that bright idea. Feeling very tired and defeated, she laid her head down on the desk and prepared for a good cry. The door opened suddenly. Startled, she jerked her head up and saw Blackwood, uncombed, unshaven, with dark shadows under his eyes. Apparently, he'd come straight here without stopping home. He hadn't even changed his clothes. I saw the light under your door, he said quietly. His mood was still as somber as it had been on the drive home, but at least now he was capable of rational speech. Didn't mean to disturb you, I'm sorry. I'm not, she snapped, no longer caring if he saw just how angry she was. I'm leaving. She licked the flap on the envelope, sealed it, and handed it to him. He took it gingerly, holding it by the corner with 2 fingers as if it were something obscene. What the hell is this? But he was frowning as if he had already guessed. She pressed her palms flat against the desktop and pushed herself into a standing position. My resignation, Dr. Blackwood. I'm quitting. Harrison winced as if she had slapped him. You can't quit now. He slipped the envelope into his shirt pocket and stepped closer to the desk. There's something I have to try out on you first. She laughed, A sharp, bitter sound. There's more? You're not satisfied with having dragged me off to the middle of nowhere, chasing after God knows what, or with having me drive all night. 7 hours without a stop, without you uttering a single word. By now she was shouting at him. What more could you possibly try out on me? I'm sorry, he began, but she waved him silent, leaning forward over the desk to vent her anger on him full force. I worked hard, Blackwood, damned hard to get where I am. Being mistreated was never part of the job description. She walked around the desk and tried to get past him to the door, but he blocked her way. Suzanne, please. His tone was conciliatory. I need your help now more than ever. What would you say if I told you I could prove the aliens have come back? She considered this for a moment, then looked him in the eye and said, Read my letter. Anger darkened his features. I'm serious, damn it. All right, then, she replied with heated sarcasm. First, get a psychiatrist, then read my letter. He tried again to launch into an explanation. Again, she refused to let him. Harrison? She hesitated, seeking the right words. They didn't come, so she blurted it straight out, still angrily, but without the nasty edge to her voice. I'm sorry you lost your parents, Harrison. I'm sorry Norton lost his family. But you two are feeding each other's paranoia, trying to get revenge for something you simply can't. And you were looking to make it a trio, but I can't pretend. I can't play along. Whatever hurt flickered in his eyes vanished quickly, replaced by resignation. Okay, Dr. McCullough. You seem to think I'm irrational. I'd like to show that you're the one not thinking clearly. Let's do this logically, then, like scientists. She raised an eyebrow skeptically. I can't wait to hear this one. No, really, Harrison persisted. Logically, there are 2 types of mistakes one can commit when making assumptions. One kind of mistake is to assume that something is true when in fact it is false. This is not a particularly serious error. For example, if I assume the aliens have come back, but they haven't really, what harm is there in that? Just an enormous waste of time and effort and money, she said coldly. She already saw what he was getting at and was frustrated that she did not have a rebuttal for him. All right, he spread his hands. I'll grant you that. An enormous waste of time and effort and money. But what about the more serious type of logical error, to assume that something is false when in fact it's true? If we assume the aliens haven't returned when they actually have, we lose far more than just time and effort and money. We lose an entire world. She stared at him without answering. All right, Suzanne. He raised his hands in an infinitely weary gesture of surrender. I can see that no matter what I say, you're not going to listen. I give up. I've upset you. I was thoughtless. I was wrong. But there's no need for you to quit the Institute. Let me talk to Ephraim. I'm sure we can get you transferred to another department. Well, all right. She blinked at him, surprise replacing anger. She had not expected this calmly reasoned response after the incident at the army installation. And I promise, he continued, regarding her soberly, to make an appointment with the resident psychiatrist today. Now, in the same soothing tone, could I please just show you that proof I was talking about? It's in my office. She wavered for an instant. An alarming thought popped into her head. He's crazy. He's dangerous. If he gets you alone in his office, he might what? Good grief, she scolded herself. He's not going to do anything there that he wouldn't do here in your office. I'll give you 2 minutes, she told him firmly, and then I'm going home to get some sleep. He seemed relieved. Fair enough. Reluctantly, she followed him down the hallway back to his office. Inside, his desk and the 2 chairs next to it were covered with dusty cardboard boxes stuffed full of yellowed file folders. The room was filled with an unpleasantly moldy, musty smell. He bent down and transferred the boxes from the chairs to the floor and motioned for her to sit. She did so warily. He sat behind the desk, resting a hand on the side of one of the boxes. "Permission to give a little background first?" he said, eyeing her askance. "Go ahead." Harrison ran his fingers through his light brown curls and turned his face to stare at the dark window pane. A muscle in his lean jaw twitched as he spoke. "My parents were killed when the alien invasion was only 3 days old. They were colleagues of Dr. Clayton Forrester. In fact, this was my father's office," which explained the ancient nameplate on the door. Harrison turned to glance affectionately at his surroundings, then patted the cardboard under his hand. "Clayton Forrester was practically my second father, anyway, after my folks died. He raised me. I grew up smothered in this research, listening to Clayton's theories, seeing how broken he was when nobody took him seriously. He said that if the aliens invaded once, they could do it again. No one wanted to hear that." "But the bacteria," she interrupted. Harrison smiled hollowly at her. "Ah, yes, the famous bacteria." Clayton led a team of scientists whose intent was to do exhaustive research on the aliens, learn everything possible about them. The microbiologist and zoologist working with him both noted that the alien remains, even the tissue samples, didn't show any decomposition. They suggested that perhaps the aliens weren't dead, at least not death as we know it. Forrester released their preliminary report to the government. It begged for more funding so that an adequate investigation of this phenomenon could be conducted. He pulled a thick document out from under a box and handed it to her. She took it somewhat skeptically and glanced through it. It seemed to be what he had said it was. "The government's response to this report?" Harrison asked, his voice full of irony. They didn't like what Forrester and his people were saying. Instead of expanding the research, the government cut Forrester off, then confiscated all alien remains and sealed them in steel drums. Out of sight, out of mind. The party line that we know everything there is to know about the aliens is an outright lie, Suzanne. You wouldn't be repeating any research that's already been done. After all these years, we know virtually nothing about them. He leaned forward with such urgency that Suzanne, still scanning the report, jumped a little. "But you saw those barrels at the Jericho Valley site." "Yes, I saw them," she said gently. "That's where my charge of paranoia comes in. I admit the government was wrong to ignore Forrester, and maybe you have some reason to be a little paranoid after all. But as far as Jericho Valley is concerned, it seems clear to me that terrorists removed those barrels for their own purposes. To think that aliens popped out of them? Well, I admit the barrels were old and rusty. They even had 1953 stamped on them. But that doesn't mean they're the barrels that contained alien remains." His ice blue eyes shone with such fierce intensity that she thought, he is mad, at least a little. "Can you remember what was stamped on those barrels? It's important, Suzanne. Can you remember?" She closed her eyes. She had an excellent memory for visual detail, and as the image of the monitor close-up of the rusty, overturned barrel coalesced before her, she read aloud, "Classified 1951 to 1953, that's all." She opened her eyes to find him grinning hugely at her. "Very impressive, Dr. McCullough. You've just made proof very easy." "I'm waiting. It's already been 2 minutes. But her tone was kinder. Maybe he was a little nutty, but he was somewhat justified in it. Harrison jumped up and rifled through one of the cardboard boxes on the desk, found what he wanted, and presented it triumphantly to her. She took it from him and squinted at it. "This," he said emphatically, "is what the barrels looked like when they were new." Clayton tried his best to document for history's sake what the government did with the remains. Most of those records were destroyed by the government, but this picture remains. It was an old black and white photo, fading and curled at the edges. On the back, a date was stamped in red ink, 10/23/53. The front showed a stack of shiny, unpainted steel drums, all bearing the same legend across their sides. Classified 1951 to 1953. She stared at it silently for a long time. Harrison was watching her keenly. Those barrels are empty now, Suzanne, and they looked as if they'd been forced open from the inside, remember? She remembered. An old terror welled up inside her, clutched at her throat, the same terror she'd felt as a child after Uncle Matthew's death, as she waited in bed beneath the covers for the aliens to make their way across the country and come for her, too. When she could speak, she whispered, "My God. Oh, my God." She put her hands to her face. "It can't be true." "I wish I were crazy," Harrison said sadly. 6 of these same barrels are now empty, and the rest of them are missing. Hundreds of them gone. He came around the desk and crouched next to her chair to gaze up into her face. She could see his concern about the effect this revelation was having on her. "That's why I hired you," he told her. "To help me continue Forrester's research, to try to find out if it's possible the aliens aren't dead, but forced by the bacteria into a state of estivation or suspended animation or anabiosis. But something has happened to bring them out of it. The whole way home I was trying to figure it out, and I think I've got an idea. I wanted to bounce it off you." She nodded, still stunned, and with that one little gesture she felt as if she had somehow stepped over an invisible line. That from now on things could never go back to being as safe and familiar and comfortable as they had always been. He put a hand on the arm of her chair and leaned forward, his face excited and alive, suddenly free of fatigue, the face of a man doing what he was born to do. "Jericho Valley was hot with radioactivity, right? Maybe that did it. Maybe the microbes that infected the aliens were wiped out from the exposure." He paused, and when she didn't answer immediately, asked, "Well, you're the microbiologist. Am I way off base?" She found her voice at last. "I suppose it could be possible, depending on the circumstances." She paused. "Have you ever heard of the African lungfish?" He shook his head. "The lungfish can survive without water for at least 4 years, and maybe as much as 10. It goes into such a profound state of anabiosis that the average person would think the fish was long dead. But if you pour water over it, it's like a resurrection. The fish is alive and swimming again." His eyes lit up hopefully. "So you don't think I'm a nutcase?" "Definitely a nutcase," she answered dryly. "But that doesn't make you wrong. Still, the radiation would have to have been extremely intense to kill off all the microorganisms inside those steel drums. Far too intense to permit those soldiers to wander around inside that base, even with their radiation suits." "The barrel I saw looked corroded, as if something had eaten away at it. Iron Horse said one of the new barrels was leaking radioactive waste. If it leaked onto one of the older barrels..." "That sounds like a real possibility. That alien corpse you want dissected, we could irradiate that and see what happens. Now that would be ironclad proof." "I'm afraid not." Harrison shook his head. "Remember, it's been frozen for years, and its head, or the area that should correspond to its head, was crushed somehow, probably in a collision when it became ill and lost control of its ship. I doubt we could get a rise out of it." "Damn," she said softly. "Then where do we start?" "We'll think of something." Harrison stood up. "We've got to figure out a plan of action to stop them, quickly. They don't have their ships and their weapons this time, but they're organized, and they're intelligent." "Any specific suggestions?" She got up from the chair and put the report under her arm, intending to take it home, then yawned, surprising herself. She clamped a hand over her mouth. "Sorry." "Don't apologize. We're both tired. In terms of specific recommendations, I think we'd better start by getting some rest. I'm about 3 naps behind myself. I can't just go home and go to sleep without knowing we've got some kind of plan to stop them. We'll figure something out, Harrison shrugged. Time may be of the essence, but I'm frankly too tired to think straight right now. She kept talking without hearing him. We've got to contact the government and get help on this. He sighed and nodded reluctantly. I know. I hate doing it because they're the ones responsible for this mess in the first place. But I was going to look through some of Clayton's files and see if I could find a name, someone, anyone to contact at the Pentagon. But I'm afraid they'll all be retired or dead by now, in which case we have to start at the bottom. He shook his head, frustrated. Damn it, it's all going to take too much time. The idea descended on her full-blown. Wait a minute. I know a very important general back east at the Pentagon. He'd be more than willing to do me a favor. He raised a sardonic brow. And now you're going to tell me he's just a good friend, right? Of the family, she snapped. Let's just say he knows my father very well. He could be of enormous help to us. General Wilson. His job is to cut through the red tape. Harrison sighed and rubbed his face wearily. Only if he's a good enough friend to keep from getting us caught up in the bureaucracy. I want free rein in this. If it looks like a government agency is going to tie our hands, I'll run the other way. I believe I could get us free rein, she replied, correcting him. All right then, get in touch with him. Just give me time to make arrangements with the sitter and get some sleep. If we could leave tonight, she broke off, suddenly overwhelmed by it all. That's the spirit. He put a hand lightly on her shoulder and glanced pointedly at the report. I take it you're not still thinking about that transfer? She pulled the envelope from his shirt pocket and, smiling, ripped it in two. Suzanne got back home at 3 a.m. The hallway was an obstacled course of half-unloaded moving boxes, so she snapped on the light in order to get to her bedroom without waking the entire neighborhood. At least she'd be able to unload the boxes with a greater sense of finality now. This was home, after all. She would stay in California, and she would work with Harrison Blackwood. The certainty brought with it a sense of relief. She slipped her flats off and held them in one hand as she tiptoed past the guest room. The door was cracked open. A strong, wheezing snoring came from inside. Mrs. Pennyworth, Suzanne, smiled. Apparently, the elderly woman was a sound sleeper. A few steps down, the door to Deb's room was ajar. The hall light was shining right into Deb's face, but the kid never stirred. Took after her dad, who always slept like the Rock of Gibraltar, regardless of the circumstances. Suzanne had always envied them that particular talent. She leaned against the doorway and watched as Deb breathed through parted rosebud lips in regular little sighs. The girl was sprawled on her side, clutching her pillow. Her forehead puckered into a frown, her hair glinting gold where the light caught it, spilling over her face. Suzanne was overcome by enormous guilt at the thought that by the time Deb woke up, she'd find out her mother was going to be leaving again that night. But then the guilt was counterbalanced by a stronger, more savage emotion. She thought of what Harrison Blackwood must have been like as a kid. Young, so much younger even than Deb. And what it must have been like for him, so young and all alone. It'll never happen to you, kid, she promised Deb silently. If I have to spend the next year traveling around the country in cars and planes, I swear I'll never let it happen again. It was a very long time before she finally got to sleep.